What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Last Principles. I'm your host, M.A., former member of the ICOC, the International Churches of Christ, joined in October of 2000, escaped in November of 2013. So a lot has been made about whether or not the ICOC is a cult. I explained a few videos ago how I finally got to the point where I do agree that it is a cult, but, I'm not going to argue somebody down off of that. If you think it's not, I'm not going to try to beat it over your head. I'm not going to try to preach to you about it. If you think it's just a high control group, cool. If you think it's not, cool. Now, while I was in the ICOC, actually in my very early stages, while I was studying the Bible, someone within the church warned me that people think that we're a cult. And because of my limited knowledge of what a cult was, I was like, how can they think we're a cult? I don't see cult behavior here. And that's because, like a lot of people, I hear cult and I think, Jim Jones, the whole Kool-Aid thing, Waco, Texas, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I hadn't seen these movies yet, but The Wicker Man, this movie wasn't even out yet. Midsommar. Those are the type of things that I would have thought of back then if someone said cult. So because that wasn't what I was seeing while I was studying the Bible, I'm like, this ain't no cult. What you talking about? So, and also I felt the fact that someone within the organization, since someone within the organization is warning me about the fact that people think they're a cult, that was a sign to me that it wasn't a cult. And I even went into, and I started hearing that the more I was sharing my faith with my friends. So I went into the dictionary and I looked up, and I don't know if it still says this, this was back in 2000. So I don't know if the definition is different now, but so I looked at that definition and I was like, you know what? According to this, any church can be called a cult. So because I got tired of that rumor, my dumb ass decided to take a dictionary, a living room coffee table Bible size dictionary at that, and put it in my backpack, because if I didn't already have enough heavy books in my backpack. So I'm walking around campus with a dictionary in my book bag, just so that, and I never ended up having to do this, but just so that if anybody ever pulled the cult card while I was sharing my faith, I could be like, you know what? You say my church is a cult. Let's look at the dictionary. Let's see what the dictionary has to say about it. You know what? According to this, my church is a cult, but so is yours. So let's move past that. So I was lost in the sauce back then. So that's how I tried to handle it back then. Now, some years later, I would hear a brother say this in response to the cult rumor. He said, "We're not a cult because cults are easy to join, but hard to leave. We're hard to join, but easy to leave." And that really resonated with me. That made all the sense in the world to me. Because I'm like, yeah, it's hard to join the ICOC. It's not easy to join. Like, we're not like normal churches where you can just, walk down the aisle at the altar call at the end of service and just, say you want to join the church and be saved. And that's that. Pray Jesus into your heart and whatnot, and you're good. It ain't like that. It ain't that simple with the ICOC. You got to come and you got to study the Bible. You got to go through this whole rigorous Bible study series to get you ready. You got to commit. You got to count the cost. You got to change your life. You got to repent. You got to confess your sins. You got to start living the life of a disciple before you become a disciple. You got to get baptized. You got to cut off your friends and family who may not be living the same way. It's hard to get into the ICOC. It's not a cakewalk. It's not easy. You got to prove yourself worthy. And it's easy to leave because no one is holding a gun to your head and making you stay. As a matter of fact, it's easy to get kicked out if you ain't living right. You're not being held against your will. So at the time, I believed it. At the time, I wholeheartedly believed that, just as another more evidence as to why we're not a cult. We're hard to join and we're easy to leave. Now, in hindsight, I only, at best, halfway believe that. Here's the thing. So I still do believe that it's hard to join the ICOC, but for slightly different reasons. So yeah, you got to go through this long Bible study series, which I will now say is an indoctrination process. Yeah, you got to go through these Bible studies, but you have to give up certain things. You got to give up your critical thinking. You can't think for yourself anymore. You got to give up your critical thinking. You got to give up your right to your privacy. You got to confess your sins to somebody you just met. Someone you may at best have known for just a few weeks, or depending on how long you've been studying the Bible. I remember I used to, I wouldn't say this now, I'm kind of cringing at the thought now, but I would call people, not to their faces, eternal visitors if they had been studying the Bible for longer than like 3 to 6 months or something like that. So, so if you've been studying the Bible for that long, you maybe know very well the people that you are confessing your sin to. But yeah, you're being asked to confess your deepest, darkest secrets to people you barely know, which is not something healthy to do. That's not something normal people do. And I wouldn't advise doing that to anybody. But yeah, you have to give up your autonomy. You have to give up your critical thinking. You got to give up your privacy, because ain't no such thing as privacy and boundaries. Me and Nicole talked about that recently. Ain't no such thing as boundaries in ICOC. You got to cut off your family, like I said before, but you got to resolve to the fact that they ain't saved. If they ain't in the ICOC already, they're not saved. They're not going to heaven. You have to believe that, or at least make them believe you believe that. You got to cut off your friends. You got to cut off your family. It still is hard to get in, but just for slightly different reasons that I mentioned before. Now, about the part about it being easy to get out. If we want to only focus on the physical aspect of leaving the ICOC, then it's easy. Because again, no one's holding a gun to your head. No one's forcing you to stay. It's not like some other cults where, you're holed up in some bunker or some compound or held in a cell or something like that. You are not being physically held against your will. You're not bound and tied and constrained in an area. You can get up and walk out if you want. But that's only if we keep it at the physical aspect of it. Psychologically, it's actually hard to leave. Here's why. So if you have joined the ICOC, even if you no longer think this, even if you let go of this belief like I did, at some point you believed that this was your only shot at heaven. At some point you believed that this organization was the only true Christians, the only true church. So if you still believe this at the time that you choose to want to leave, you are now wrestling with the idea that if I leave, I'm forfeiting my shot in heaven. I'm forfeiting my spot in heaven if I leave. I'm going to hell if I leave. Let that sink in. Now, for me, I had already let go of the idea of the ICOC being the only church. I wasn't thinking that. I think that's kind of what helped me make it easier for me to leave when I did. But not everybody's there when they decide to leave, when they decide they've had enough, when they decide I need to get the hell out. They may still have that mindset of this is the only church. Now, I've heard a few testimonies where they're like, you know what? I don't care that I'm going to hell. It can't be worse than what I got right now. I need to get out. Or maybe, something close to that. Maybe not exactly that all the time, but I've heard people say that and things close to that. So imagine you still think that the ICOC is the only way into heaven, but you still feel like you got to get out, and you got to wrestle with that as you leave. Also, going back to the fact that you've cut off your family and friends. And also, we've all seen or heard people get disfellowshipped, and when they get disfellowshipped, the church is told not to have anything to do with them. Don't have any contact with them. If they want to come back, they need to come through us as the leaders. You can't go bring them back in. So you're taught to not have any contact with anybody who's left. So now you're struggling with the fact that if you leave, you're going to be cut off with this group of people who have been told they have been your new family for as long as you've been there. Because you've already cut off your family and friends. And depending on how zealous you were and gung-ho about telling them they ain't saved and they going to hell. Fortunately, I didn't do that. By the grace of God, I didn't do that with my family. So I actually had blood family to go back to. You know, we had our little incidents in the beginning, but it wasn't so bad that, you know, they never rubbed it in my face. They never threw it in my face. They never held it against me. So fortunately, again, I had blood family to go back to, and I had friends to go back to. Not everybody has that. Some people, when they leave, because they cut their family off so hard in the beginning, they don't have family to go back to. You know, some family, even when there was conflict in the beginning, some family still lets them back in. You know, maybe not without a little conflict on the way back in, but they still let them back in. But there are some people got disowned by their family when they joined the ICOC. So they have nobody to go back to. So now you've lost the family that you've had while you're at the ICOC, but you've also lost your friends and family from before. So you are alone now. And you got to wrestle with that on your way out. Now you got to go find new family, and that's not always easy to do. And depending on what happened with you while you were in the ICOC, I've heard testimonies of people who have been told to give up their career in order to, you know, to be in the ministry, or in order to just be spiritual, in order to just be a disciple. You got to leave your industry because it's not conducive to being spiritual. So say you've left whatever your career was, say you, and some people have even been told to drop out of college and go to like a community. You know, they might have been accepted at this big prestigious college. But they were like, no, you need to tone it down a little bit and come over here and do this and serve the ministry. So they might have given up on a degree that would have helped them in life. They might have given up a lucrative career to be in a ministry, or again, just to be a disciple, just to be saved, just to be spiritual. So depending on how long you've been out of your field, now you're going back. You're like, I'm starting all the way back fuck over from square one. Or I might even be so far behind that I can't even get into my field. I got to go figure something else out. That makes it hard to leave as well, because now you're like, how do I make a living? Especially if you've been in the ministry and you've been on staff and that was your income. Now you don't have that. What do I do now? I kind of look at that as like, you know, and this is not exclusive to the ICOC. There's like, say you have this woman who's been the church secretary for like 30 years and all of a sudden she gets fired. What can she do now? You know, got to go back to school, got to go, like, it's hard to start over like that. So there are a lot of people who have been in the ICOC, and now that they've left, what the fuck do I do? What do I do? What can, you know, how do I make ends meet? Because I'm so far behind in my career or my field of work. I've been so out of it. I can't do anything. So that's why it's hard to leave. All those reasons is why it's hard to leave. And you can even add the psychological aspect to the physical part. I've heard so many testimonies recently where someone, you know, fortunately they have a circle of friends or they have a support system when they're trying to get out, and they have to coordinate a time to leave because, you know, that's another thing because if you're not married, if you're single and if you're in campus as single, and you basically are highly encouraged, if not forced, to live in a household with other disciples. So depending on your living arrangement, you know, you may think, because, hey, I don't want to leave because I may not have anywhere else to go. You may have bad credit. You can't get an apartment by yourself. You know, you may not be able to get rides by yourself. So if you leave, you lose access to all of that. Or if you decide you don't want to be in the church, your roommates are encouraged to kick you out. Now, in my case, fortunately, I had the master bedroom and I had my name on the lease, so good luck kicking me out. But also, fortunately, my roommates were very cool with me, and because I chose to leave, it was not seen as a disfellowshipping. So I was just very fortunate. I was very fortunate in a lot of my situation where I didn't have all of these obstacles. But that's not everybody's situation. That's not everybody's experience. A lot of people Again, if they say they want to leave, there's no chance you're staying in that household. I've seen it happen, but it's rare. I've seen it happen, but it's rare. Where you say, hey, I don't want to be in the ICOC anymore, and they let you stay in that house. A lot of times you get kicked out. But yeah, so going back to the whole adding the psychological aspects to the whole leaving physically. So yeah, you can easily leave physically, but what might happen is you try to leave, and I don't know of any stories of people being of putting hands on people, not like fighting, but people trying to physically prevent you from leaving. It wouldn't surprise me if it did, but I hadn't heard any of those stories just yet. So I have heard testimonies of people who want to leave, and fortunately have their support group. They're like, hey, let me know when you're trying to move. I'll get my truck out. We'll get our friends and we'll help you get out. But they're still having to coordinate times where their roommates won't be home, so there won't be any conflict when they try to leave. So there's still a psychological aspect of that. The fact that you would have to coordinate that time when your roommates aren't home so you can move out, that's the psychological aspect of that. That's still making it hard to physically leave, even if you don't come to any physical boundaries in getting out. So yeah, another reason why I do think the ICOC is a cult, because it may be hard to get in, it's also hard to leave. So yeah, y'all hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know if that resonated with you. Share, please, vent to your heart's content in the comments. Sound off, let it all, get it off your chest, all of that. I'm here for you. I'm here to hear it all out, here to validate you, let you know you're not alone, let you know you're not crazy. And that's it. Y'all have a good night, and I'll see y'all at the next video. Peace.